Hey guys, Darren Carr here, coach of Wise Ocean Pods, and welcome back to the second edition of this club preview series. On today's episode, we will be discussing the Premiers, the Brisbane Lions, and talking about all things AFL fantasy, like who are their ins, who are their outs from the trade period, players that they delisted, that are retired, all those sort of things that are going to affect our decision when it comes to AFL fantasy. So we'll be looking at all the relevant players that you should be considering for your AFL fantasy team for 2025. So let's get into it.
All the pain.
Alrighty, so today we are discussing the Brisbane Lions, the minor premiers, and sorry, not the minor premiers. They were the premiers, so they finished fifth overall last season in the home and away season, which was a bit of a surprise looking back at seeing how good they were throughout majority of the season. They just sort of had probably a lackluster start and a couple of bad games here and there that ultimately meant they finished outside the top four. But it didn't matter in the end. They came through in the finals and blitzed everybody in the end. They went into the grand final probably not as the favourites and absolutely blew the Swans out of the water and ended up having a massive win there, particularly when they were a ruckman down and a few other key players that were injured or going through a few different things there. So big congratulations to them. But what does this all mean for fantasy? So where do we expect them to head next year? A lot of speculation is that they're going to still finish around sort of that top four range. I think when you look at their list and who they've sort of got coming back into their team, just to rattle off a few, they've got Tom Doedee that they recently traded into from the Adelaide Crows. Didn't play a single game last year. So they've got him to come back into the side. They also got the likes of Kitty Coleman, who unfortunately got an ACL injury in the opening round of last year. So they've got him coming back in. Obviously, Oscar McInerney should be fit and firing to go again this year after missing out on the grand final, unfortunately, with I think it was a shoulder injury at the end of the day. And really, this list hasn't really changed. The only key difference that they've made really was the Joe Danaher has retired. So now they're probably scrambling a little bit for that key forward sort of depth that they're really looking for to really find that next target. And they have a plethora of different options that they will look at. They threw a Morris a fair bit last year, so he'd probably take the reins for a little bit as well. But they also have a Ryan that is in their VFL team, so they can probably throw him in there as well. He's shown some capacity. He played for the Hawks, so he's got some capacity there. So I don't think they'll struggle too much, and I do expect them to still finish around that top four zone. In terms of their trades ins and outs, so really they traded no one in. They weren't really in that trading pool where they really were looking for that next step to jump them up. They really knew that, obviously being the premiers, that they're pretty happy with their list. None of the players wanted to get out too much, so really they didn't really have to target anyone. So no trade-ins for the Brisbane Lions there, which makes it a little bit easier for us in terms of fantasy. The outs they had, so Harry Sharp was our only trade out, probably just due to lack of opportunity. Wasn't really doing too much. I think he played like an overall 20 or 30 games in his career over the 4 or 5 seasons that he's had at the Brisbane Lions. So he just really traded to get more opportunity. Obviously, someone that's maybe not pushing for a flag as much and can work his way in to be a consistent best 22. And the other ones, obviously, Joe Danaher retired. Jared Lyons also retired after not really getting too much opportunity last year. I believe he only played 3 games, which came early on in the season. So his time was well and truly done. Just got squeezed out of that side. So he is no longer a factor when you consider them. And they also delisted James Madden, Caitlin Lane, and Carter Michael. 3 names I'm not too completely sure. I believe I had Madden a couple of years ago, but didn't really make too much of an influence. all these changes, what does it really do to their overall best 22? So I've got this best 22 projection, which the AFL are producing at the moment here, and I can't really fault it, to be honest. I sort of very much agree with it. My only probably thing is maybe in the back line. I think Gardner still probably floats in there a fair bit. Just whether he's who he can squeeze out is probably my question, because I can't fault it, honestly, unless like a Tom Duday doesn't actually get in the best 22. But I think they traded him for a reason. And I think he provides that different attribute back there. So definitely think he'll be there. And you've also got to squeeze in Kitty Coleman, that will obviously be that half-back distributor, which we're all looking forward to see this season. In terms of the draft, they really had one goal in mind, and that was to secure Levi Ashcroft, that pick 5. So they went to the draft with a host of picks ranging from like 27 to 66, and that was just to match the pick, wherever Ashcroft was going to be picked at, which ended up being pick 5. So they will do that, and they picked him up very nicely there. So he will be a massive one that we'll talk about a little bit later. So to get into the players that are on my watch list for the 2025 season, I've only got 6, so this should be a fairly short video, but that's just what happens when you get the premiers. So the first one I wanted to talk about was Dane Zorko. How can you go past this guy when he is ranked 3rd for defenders on average currently, and he was ranked 6th overall from last year after he averaged 110.3, which is massive. Considering how massive of a player he was last year. He is priced at roughly $1.13 million. So he's going to cost you some pretty penny. Obviously increased his average from that 85 the year prior, but that was mainly due to that switch where he went from the forward line to the halfback, becoming that main distributor. And it was a real tough one to really pick at the right time last year, because a lot of us were sort of like, do we do it? Do we not? He's 35 years old. He's had a history of soft tissue injuries, but he sort of got over that. Surprisingly, he played 27 games last year. I don't think he missed a single one for being 35 years old. He will be 36 coming in the new year in February. So that's all those things you got to take in. He has been a big fantasy player for us in the past. Like you can see, he's averaged over 100 for us in a couple years prior. That was back when he was sort of having a bit more of a midfield spot. So he's made this halfback role he's sort of his own, and I think this is going to continue. I think he did too well that they're not going to change that for them, even though they do have a few halfbackers coming back into the side. I would be surprised to see him lose that role. However, I do expect him to drop in his overall fantasy points. I don't think he's going to average just 110 again. I think he can sort of average that 95 to 100 range, but I think over 100 when you got the likes of Kitty Coleman coming back in. You've got Wilmot back there as well, that does get a fair bit of the ball. And then you throw in Duday at the same time. I think they're just going to share the ball around a bit more. When you look at the kick-ins, it's probably one of the key stats. Zorko was sort of that main guy back there, taking all their kick-ins. You can see 111, and he played on 101 times, so he was definitely the main one. Does that get him a bit of a drop? I think it will. Just with the likes of Kitty Coleman come back, I think he does slot in and take a couple off of him here and there. So I do expect that little bit of a drop for Zorko, but obviously he's one we've got to talk about. He is probably still going to be around that sort of top 6 range in the defenders and always in that conversation. It's just whether when you're going to pick him up at that point. I don't think you start with him. I'll make that clear. Don't start with him from my point of view, unless you see something that I don't. But I don't see a world where I'm starting him just because he is so expensive. And yeah, all the factors, he's 36, soft tissue history, and yeah, I don't see any points of upside there for him. But in saying that, he provides some massive scores, like 184 his max score last year, which was just ridiculous. I remember that game just looking at halftime and he was already like on 111 or something like that, and was, yeah, I was at that point I didn't have him and I was scared. So yeah, he can put up some massive scores when he just gets the ball, or willy-nilly. But the main thing is that he is no longer a forward option for us, so he will have to pick him as a pure defender. Yeah, and it's just a no for me at this point in time. The second person I wanted to talk about is his teammate, obviously, is Josh Dunkley, who was the second highest averaging for their team. He averaged 107.4. He is priced at 1.1, a little bit over $1.1 million, so will cost you again. He is currently ranked number 5 in the mids and 11 overall, so just outside the top 10 of the players of the competition in terms of fantasy. He is just an absolute gun in terms of being an AFL fantasy footballer. He has shown a massive capacity over his career to absolutely rack it up just with his ability to have this great overhead mark and be a huge tackler at the same time. So he's really consistent in that way that he plays. So doesn't just purely rely on these massive disposal games. He can get it in other ways. So that's why I love Josh Donkey so much. That he's just very consistent. Max score of 158. He'll be there or thereabouts as well. He did increase his average again from last year from a 104.4 to 107.4. So there's probably not too much of an argument to say that he is undervalued. So he is one that I probably won't start with. Particularly, probably the reason why I should have started off with this whole conversation is that the Brisbane Lions have the opening round. So they will be playing in the opening round, which again doesn't account for our fantasy teams. Our teams start on round 1. So they will have an early round bye, which is round 3 for them, which is the hardest opening round, early round buys, because there's 4 teams on the bye that round, which is the Brisbane Lions, the Cats, the Pies, and the Swans. So when you got to consider starting some of these Brisbane Lions players, you really got to think about, okay, who else have I got on that early round bye? Because you really don't want to be too heavy just because you will lag behind early on in the season. I think it's okay. I think what we learned from last season was that starting the cheap guys that are going to rise in price, absolutely fine. But starting these primo guys that you're expecting, big scores from, and be your captain options really isn't worth it, because at the end of the day, you've got, say, like from my previous video, you got a Dawson and a Josh Dunkley. Well, Dawson has an extra game on Dunkley to score equal points, so you're really banking on Dunkley scoring, a consistent 120, whereas, Dawson only needs to go 100 to get the same sort of equal points over, say, a 5-period game. So that's just my theory and my thinking around starting these sort of premium players where you really don't see much value. You're just really picking them because you expect them to sort of continue being that same sort of price point and be a consistent scorer for you. So in this instance, I probably wouldn't start Josh Dunkley. Unless there's something in the preseason that shows that he's going to take another step up and push the 110 range. I think he'll stay. I think he'll push his average probably 109. Just probably taking a bit more of the points a little bit again. Just maybe getting more of the outside ball. Maybe he gets pushed out a little bit with the likes of Levi Casbolt coming. Not Levi Casbolt. Levi Ashcroft. I don't know why I keep saying Casbolt. Ashcroft coming into the midfield a little bit more with what role he may have. So maybe Josh Dunkley spends a bit more time on the wing, and we know he can score well on the wing at the same time. So big season, but yeah, I think he will stay very well consistent. That sort of leads me into his teammate, Lockie Neal, I guess, where same sort of conversation. He's sort of dropped off in probably the last 2 or 3 years, where he was one of the highest averaging players of the competition only 2 years ago, but now he's sort of dropped off just in that 101 range. He is priced at just over $1 million, at $1.03 million. So still will cost you a fair chunk of money, but for rightly so. The thing about Neil for me is that he goes on these massive stretches where he just has huge games. If I bring up the scores here, just looking at this period from round 8 to round 24, the main back end of the season, he just went 137, 80, 122, 100, 128. Had that tagged 50 from, I think it was, what's that player's name? Can't remember right now. 135, 100, 143, 150, 133. And yeah, he just really has these big games. And if you can get on him at the right time and he has these massive stretches during the season, you're living. You're just loving it. So I remember even the year prior, I jumped on him for probably like a 5-game period. And he just absolutely killed it. I think it was during the buys here. I jumped on him around 13 and he went 124, 194, 127 and 127. At that point he was cheaper than what he had been all season. So you really got to look at when the price is right for you to jump on him, because he can provide absolutely massive points for you. In saying that, I do expect probably another bit of a decline for him with, like I said, with the Ashcroft boys probably jumping in the midfield a little bit more, pushing him out probably a little bit here and there. At the end of the day, he is still the captain of the club, so he'll get his hands on the ball. It just may be a bit more of a not super reliant on him. But still saying that, he still puts up massive scores, 143 being his max score of the season. And I still think he will be the main target for the opposition. So, yeah, that's another big factor for him. And he's probably a non-starter for me this season. With those three main guys out of the way, we now get into the cheaper guys, the bargains, you must say. And we can't go anywhere but to start with Kitty Coleman. He is just an absolute bargain. We were talking about him this time last season, where I think 40% had him in their teams before opening round, and unfortunately he did go down with that ACL injury in the opening round. So luckily enough, none of us started with him. We were able to make the changes prior to round one, and yeah, unfortunately for him, he did miss out for the rest of the season, but fortunately for us, that means he has got a 27% discount from his 2023 average, which was around that 70 mark, 69.6, which now has him priced down at 51. So he's going to be priced at 521k as a pure defender. And as someone who that can push 70s, if not closer to 80s, that's absolutely a bargain, and he is probably a guaranteed start for me unless I don't see everything that I want in the preseason and the opening round, which again, luckily we get to watch him in there. So I think he just slots back into that role. When we look at their team, if I go back to that screenshot, he definitely slots back into the back six there. It probably being the main distributor alongside Zorko and Wilmot, really. I think he takes the McKenna sort of spot, who took a lot of the kick-ins last year. So Connor McKenna, I don't think he plays a lot this season. Sort of just taking those sort of kick-outs that they relied on him there. You're not touching Starcevic and Andrews. They're guaranteed in that side. So definitely one that I'm watching for sure. What more can I say, really? He was getting a big bump. I could even go back to his 2023 season where we were looking at him. Where is his score? He went absolutely ballistic sort of in the finals, where I think he was on like 90 points in the grand final. I remember being at that game and he was just absolutely flying. He was everywhere. But the back end of that season for him, he was just absolutely flying. And he was really showing that he really went that step up. So you can even see from his early part of that season where he was sort of that sort of 50 averaging point guy. Then he really took that step up after the buys, a few hundreds in there, and yeah, really ramped up. So they were really starting to rely on him a lot more to be that main distributor, and I think that's going to continue. Again, we're going to wait and see what happens in the preseason, but 100% expect him to take that role and thrive and probably provide us 30 points of value at a minimum. So I expect him to push into the 80s, if not closer to the 90 range of his fantasy points. So he is a lock in my side currently, and hopefully yours too. Two more to go through, and this one's probably a quick one, but it is Tom Duday. Now, he is not super fantasy relevant and never has been. Like, his highest fantasy relevant score has been 65. But when you consider how cheap he's going to be, because he's spent 18 months out of the game, last played in 2023, he is priced down at 39, so below 400k. It's because he's got that 30% discount off the 2024 season because he didn't play a single game. That comes off of his average of 55 from 2023. So he is going to be cheap. Like, he's just above a rookie price in a sense. Like, he's 50k above, what's his name? Lawler. So he is, and you'd think he's going to be a guaranteed best 22. So when you think about all those things that you consider, he's not a rookie. He's 27 years old. He's pretty much rookie price. He's probably going to be a lock for being best 22. All those sort of things are lining up that you think, okay, lock him in. As long as he can score well enough and keep injury free, then he should provide, say, 15 to 20 points of value if he can push those sort of 60s. So that's why he's on my watch list. If he can, show that in the preseason that he's going to be there or thereabouts, then he is definitely one I'll be considering in the bottom half of my defensive line. Again, he is just a pure defender as well, so no DPP there at all. But I think we're actually probably struggling more on the defensive line than we are for forwards this year, which is funny to say. So definitely one to note down and keep a big eye on in the preseason. Then the final guy, you can't go talk about the Brisbane Lions without talking about this guy, and that is Levi Ashcroft. And one thing I guess I just really want to touch on is that obviously he's priced at 32, so he's priced at 328k. So one of the more expensive rookies, but for good reason. When at pick 5, he averaged 145 in the VFL. That's only in one game, but you take what you can get. He is just an absolute accumulator. Had 35 touches, 8 marks and 5 tackles, and also hit the scoreboard. So he is just an absolute gun, and honestly probably should have been in the top 2, if not the pick 1, if he wasn't part of the academy there. So he is an absolute gun, and he should slot right into your midfield line, probably at M6, I would say, if not M5, if you're running with a deep, a light on midfield. Well, which a lot of people are looking at this year, just from early conversations. They're looking at running 4 rookie midfielders. So he could definitely be one of those. Just looking at here some of his numbers from the AFL Under-18s Champions League and the Talent League as well. He just absolutely kills it. It don't have to look too hard to see that he is absolutely an accumulator, and he's going to be a fantasy gun for us. It's just the role that he's going to play. When you look at the team, where does he slot in? I think he's going to be very similar to what his brother sort of did. He's going to float in and take probably 30 to 40% CBAs throughout the first season, and probably float a little bit forward and a little bit wing here and there, just doing a little bit different jobs here and there when the others are resting. So they'll have a bit of a rotation when it comes to their midfield. Just looking at the CBA numbers, obviously heavily relied on Neil. I think those numbers will drop from 90 to sort of that 70 range. That would just free up a bit of numbers. Even Dunkley probably drops from that 80 to 70 as well, just freeing up more numbers. McCluggage probably stays very similar, if not drops down to 60, and that just frees up a little bit of the numbers again for, his Will Ashcroft and then also Levi Ashcroft. So getting both of the Ashcroft brothers in there. I did look at Ashcroft's a little bit in terms of if he presents any value, but I don't think he's one I'm super keen on. There's too many numbers in there, too many other fantasy friendly guys. He's already priced at sort of that 86 range, so I just don't see him pushing too much more of that, even though he did have a great end at the end of that season, coming back from injury. So probably another one you keep an eye on, but hasn't probably made my list just yet, because I think he's probably more on the expensive side of things, where I'm really looking for that cheaper value. But that sort of does it for this video, honestly. It's probably a bit of a quicker one. The Brisbane Lions, obviously being the premiers, there's not a huge amount of talk about. But yeah, hopefully you guys have enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys for the next one. Colton, see you guys later.